Imagine as an architect being given the opportunity to reimagine one of Melbourne's most iconic buildings. To take the original reading room of State Library Victoria, a dark, musty space that had fallen into disrepair for 16 years, and transform it into this, the majestic Ian Potter Queen's Hall. For Melbourne firm Architectus, it was the opportunity of a lifetime.
Projects such as this don't come around every day, so when we were selected to be the lead consultant for the redevelopment, it was such an honour. It was a huge celebration in our practice and really began a journey. For us, it was almost 5 years through the deep consultation with both the library and the public and other stakeholders through the design phase, and then through the construction phase, and finally to see it open last December was highlight of my career.
It was a transformation made possible by an extraordinary $10 million donation from the Ian Potter Foundation.
We got involved in the library because it's an iconic institution, one of the first free libraries in the world. And when the opportunity came to make a donation and open up this beautiful hall that had been closed for maybe 16 years, we were very excited.
One of the main principles of this project was to reveal rather than to replicate, and to come up with a contemporary design which celebrates rather than overpowers the grandeur of this hall. The goal was to create a quiet reading room by day, which could be transformed into a stunning event space by night.
I think one of the greatest challenges was making sure that this beautiful hall could still perform all those different functions and still maintain its greatness. Sometimes when we get a space to do a lot of things through a series of kind of functional requirements, they kind of overlap each other and you end up making a few compromises and you end up with a fairly characterless space. So we were driven that that wouldn't happen here.
For Ruth and her team, this project posed some wonderfully gnarly design and engineering challenges, starting with the roof. When the hall first opened in 1856, in the days before electricity, its overhead skylights were vital for a reading room. But a dramatic thunderstorm shattered the glass in 1901, and eventually, in the 1970s, a corrugated iron roof was installed on top of the skylights for protection. The question was how to let the natural light pour back in while still protecting the delicate diamond and fish scale glazing. The answer lay in a lightweight translucent roof that was installed over the entire hall, creating a discreet space for 21st century heating and cooling.
So we're standing behind the main parapet of the library, looking at the outermost skin of the Ian Potter Queen's Hall. And behind all this, through many layers of different services and everything that we'll look at, is the beautiful fish scale roof light.
And the whole point of this is to provide unfettered light down into the original spaces below.
This outer skin, the space between the outer skin and the inner skin, allows us to feed all the contemporary services into the hall. So the hall is heated and cooled for the very first time through the redevelopment.
Standing here, I kind of feel a sense of relief, pride, and also taking a moment to think, we're just touching this once. There's been so many other hands that have been involved in this building in the past and will be in the future. So we're just a very small moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel proud that we've safeguarded it for the next 100 years or so. Yeah. Brought it back to what it was, but also, protected its future.
And done it in a way that's reversible. So if future generations find this wasn't quite the right move, this can all be undone without any damage to the heritage structure and fabric.
So now we're on the inside of that outer skin and looking at the fish scale roof lights. You probably notice that everything's white, and there's a reason for that. We didn't want shadows being cast onto the roof lights. So by making everything white, it bounces the light around here and really maximises the amount of natural light getting back into Queen's Hall. This whole roof story is a happy surprise. As the design team developed this idea of the second roof protecting the original roof, It triggered lots of other innovations. So WSP, our mechanical engineers, came up with a really innovative air handling system for the hall, using this space to feed all the ductwork and hide the mechanics behind that system. And then when Built, the contractor, came on board, they looked at the whole buildability of the roof with the steel framing and how logistically that was all going to happen, and they had some really great ways of doing that. At one stage this whole hall was wrapped in the membrane, all very neatly wrapped because it had to be 100% waterproof as they took off the old tin roof and gradually installed in segments the new roof. Every inch perfectly lapped and jointed and taped to make sure that not a drop of water got into Queen's Hall during that complicated installation.
The new roof also needed to be light, and the build was like watching a Meccano set being put together.
We needed to consider how we would get this up on the roof and do that in a careful manner, and this was achieved by bringing the structure up piece by piece and integrating it in. We were able to watch this from afar. Our studio is 2 blocks away from here on Burke Street, up on level 25. So we had the ability to watch progress as this was underway, and only need to come down when something was going not quite right.
By uncovering the skylights and reglazing the bars, the original diamond and fish scale design could shine through.
When the first bay of glazing went up in the roof lights and we actually saw what it was going to be like, just this beautiful light coming in, this soft light, that was a watershed moment. It was so exciting. So the patterning of the roof lights is what we call the fish scale geometry, and I guess that was also to do with the size of glass available at that time, but it was constructed that each one of those fish scales was a pane of glass, so framed in the cast iron frame. In the contemporary version of that we now have, we've kept that beautiful cast iron fish scale, but the glass behind it is actually quite thick. It's almost 25 mil thick, made up of many layers of glass and a cavity. It's actually curved behind the fish scales. And what it means is that glass is what we call a high performance glass. It doesn't let the heat out in winter, and in summer it doesn't let the radiant heat back in to overload the heat of the hall.
The other key to maintaining temperature control was finding a system that would work quietly, efficiently, and it could be installed in a way that wouldn't damage any of the heritage features.
The physical volumes are quite challenging because it's not just one large area. They've got these mezzanines here that break it all up. So we needed a rather sophisticated system that could ventilate the space quickly, bring the space up to temperature quickly. For that, consultants chose the Bauer system, and that works by gently pulsing air into the space at different rates in different areas to equally mix the air. So the air's coming through each of these pyramids here and then returning through the grills that you can see here at a lower level.
There are so many fascinating details in this hall that you might not notice, like the tiny red dots up in the plaster roses. The architects discovered little holes in the roses where the original chandeliers once hung. The same holes were cleverly used later to hold smoke detectors. And you might wonder why there are 4 darker coloured patches on the floor here.
This change in timber here on the floor represents the original columns that stood here in the hall a long time ago, when there was a circular oculus in the floor here, which provided light down into the space below. This is swamp oak. It's the same species as this floor. It's just been underwater for a number of years, giving it a darker, richer colour. Using the timber here to create a memory of the columns was really important for us because it's just another layer of the hall and the State Library's very rich history.
Throughout the redevelopment, Ruth and Simon encountered wonderful surprises.
We embarked on this process of revealing, and I guess at times we found things that we weren't expecting. The specialist Mulholland scraped back layers of paint that had happened over many decades, and you can see here on this one, there's a couple of white patches there, which is damage that's occurred at some time over that 160 plus years. But That's what we found and that's what we're showing. So it's a very honest process and an honest representation of all the human touches that have happened in the hall over that period.
Before any work began on the design front, the architects spent months consulting with library users to find out what they wanted from their glorious hall.
We had to think of all the different people that were going to come into the hall and enjoy it. So for example, the beautiful iron balustrade here, which we definitely wanted to keep, was unfortunately too low and also climbable by children. So behind that you can see very, very discreetly a new glass balustrade. For the non-ambulant people, we put in a lift, so there's lift access from the foyer, there's a hearing loop, even down to small details like the contrast between the floor and the walls with that highlighted by the skirting so that vision impaired people can navigate around with confidence. We know people from all walks of life seek out the library often as a quiet space. So in the ceiling there are, laid in a very discreet way, absorptive panels, and the floor is a beautiful Tasmanian oak, and underneath that it's bonded to several layers of solid timber, so it's massive, and then underneath that is particular rubber material that also increases the absorbency.
And none of this would have been possible without the vision and the generosity of the Ian Potter Foundation.
The size of the hall impresses one, and the lighting is terrific. And then you've got the renovation where you see the old painting and it's still being exposed, and the chairs and the desks, they're well over 100 years old. And they're there in a renovated state, and they can be used. And they'll be appreciated by people coming to this hall.
When the Ian Potter Queen's Hall finally reopened to the public after its 16-year closure, the response was overwhelming.
I'm astounded.
It's so exciting, it's so beautiful.
No, it's magnificent. It's like the best.
I don't know how much work I'd get done. I've been looking around the whole time.
We really hope the beautiful Ian Potter Queen's Hall finds its way into every Victorian's heart. And I think our journey started when we won the project and obviously worked on it all those years. And then personally, I was actually married here recently, so it felt very special to do that in a room that means so much to me because it's been part of my life intensely for so many years, but also knowing that it's always going to be here. So we're always going to be able to come back here and go, yep, this is where it happened.
This room was built more than 160 years ago, showing such ambition and aspiration for Victoria. The founders built this library for us, and now through this project, we've built a library for future generations.